The march music started before I reached the stage, and for a second I almost forgot to breathe. Coronado Naval Base looked different when everyone was watching. The Pacific was behind us, sharp blue in the late afternoon light, rows of white uniforms in front of me, cameras on tripods, families in calm summer clothes, medals ready on a polished table. I had stood on this parade ground many times, but never as the person everyone had come to see. I felt the eyes of officers who used to look through me like I was part of the wall. I felt the stare of men who had once told me to stay in the air-conditioned room, and I felt his stare too. Commander Tyler Briggs. He was in the third row on the right next to the families, dress white's perfect jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. 6 months ago, he laughed at me in front of a room full of operators. Now he had to sit still and watch. I kept walking. My heels clicked against the temporary platform. The band softened. The announcer read my name slowly, the rank that once sounded small but no longer did. Lieutenant Mara Keaton. The words carried over the water. People turned. Somewhere in the back I heard a little gasp from a woman who did not expect the person getting the Silver Star today to be a young intel officer and not a gray-haired combat hero. That was fine. People rarely expect quiet work to matter. The Admiral stepped forward, tall, sunburned ribbons like a small flag on his chest. His voice was the kind that could stop a hangar full of sailors. Today it was warm. Today it was respect for exceptional tactical intelligence in support of a special operations mission, for actions that preserved American lives, for conduct above and beyond. He pinned the medal on my uniform. The medal was cold first, then warm with the heat of California sun and the heat of the moment. I stood at attention, chin up, breathing steady the way we are taught. But inside, I was not steady. Inside, I was remembering a different room with fluorescent light where the same people rolled their eyes and called me Lieutenant Google. I was remembering a dining table where my own family said we fight wars, you file reports. I was remembering the day they said I was too young to lead too soft to stand my ground. They said that, but the ocean remembers the quiet ones. I looked over the crowd. My father was there. Retired Colonel Richard Keaton, stiff hands behind his back, his expression hard to read. My mother sat next to him, eyes wet. My brother Evan was not clapping yet. He was still processing how the officer his friend had been dating behind our backs was now the woman on stage. That was another reason I kept my shoulders square. This was not only a military moment. This was a family betrayal turned inside out. This was toxic family exposed by military truth. Then it happened. From the left side of the stage, a figure in SEAL dress uniform stepped forward. Commander Avery Cole. Not Briggs, not the man who mocked me. A man the community actually respected. He stopped in front of me. His boots halted with a firm sound. For a heartbeat, the whole base held its breath. He looked me straight in the eye and said in a clear voice everyone could hear, "At ease, Mom." A SEAL commander was saluting me. The waves behind us kept moving, but the people did not. I heard the surprise move through the rows like wind. Someone said, "I thought she was just intel." Someone else whispered, "She is the one who sent the report." Briggs' head dropped just a fraction. His face went a shade paler. He knew. He knew this was not luck. This was the day his laugh came back to him. The cameras caught it. The families saw it, the command saw it. Justice was public now. I held the salute for a second longer than needed so everyone could see it. Then I let it go. 6 months earlier, they shut me out of a briefing and laughed. Today, I did not need to raise my voice. The work I did spoke. Have you ever been pushed out of a room because someone decided you were too young, too female, too quiet to matter? This ceremony was for people like that, for women who held the line in silence, for anyone who waited while others took credit, for anyone who chose quiet justice over noise. Today I wanted them to feel every second of my rise. Finally. When I think about where it really began, it was not the day Commander Briggs laughed at me. It was a Sunday dinner at my parents' house, the kind of quiet evening that looks harmless until you remember how small words can bruise. The smell of roast beef filled the kitchen. My mother, Linda, moved around the table carefully, keeping her voice soft, as if tone could keep peace where peace never lived. My father, Colonel Richard Keaton, retired but still carrying command in his shoulders, sat at the head of the table. His uniform had been replaced by pressed shirts, but his eyes still inspected like a drill. My two brothers, Evan and Luke, both Marines, were already arguing about which deployment had been harder. When I mentioned that I had spent the week finalizing an intel report that prevented an ambush on a SEAL convoy, they did not even look up. My father sliced his meat and said, without looking at me, "We fight wars, you file reports." The sentence dropped like a stamp of judgment. Evan laughed. Luke joined him. My mother tried to change the subject, asking if anyone wanted more potatoes. I shook my head. That single line stayed in the air longer than the smell of food. I had been trained to read silence, and the silence that followed was clear. They believed what he said. I was the youngest, the daughter, the computer girl. In their world, I was the family's background noise. I had a commendation letter locked in my desk, signed by a senior intelligence officer, thanking me for identifying the pattern that had saved that SEAL team. I never told them. What would be the point? In this house, courage wore camouflage and carried a rifle. My kind of courage came with data and timing. My father would have called that statistics. That night, I drove back to my small apartment in San Diego, the one with walls covered in charts and mission briefs. I sat at my desk reading through encrypted emails. One name stopped me. Tyler Briggs, newly appointed operations liaison for the next joint mission. I recognized it instantly. My father had mentioned him years ago, one of his former trainees, a man he had dismissed for being reckless. He had called him a showboat with no discipline. I smiled at the irony. The same man who taught me that mistakes cost lives had humiliated a subordinate until that man left his unit. Now that man was about to be my superior. I did not believe in karma then, but I was about to learn what family betrayal looked like in uniform. The next morning at the Naval Intelligence Center, the building was half light, half reflection of the ocean through glass. I logged in, pulling satellite feeds and data flows for Operation Silent Reef. My analysis was solid layered, ready for briefing. When the door opened, I turned expecting a fellow analyst. Instead, Briggs walked in. Taller than I expected, his confidence filling the space before he spoke. He smiled the way men smile when they want to remind you who carries rank. "So, you're Colonel Keaton's daughter." I nodded, keeping my tone level. "Yes, sir." His smile widened. "Heard your father had opinions about my leadership." I said nothing. Silence is often the only defense allowed in rooms like that. He looked at my monitor and said, "Intel work, huh? Guess every family needs someone to do the paperwork." It was the same sentence in different uniform, the same dismissal wearing new authority. That night, I called home. My father answered. I told him about the new assignment about working under Briggs. There was a pause long enough to reveal guilt. Then he said, "Keep your head down. He's ambitious." The irony was too clean to ignore. My father had broken a man's ambition once. That man now had the power to break mine. For a second, I wanted to tell him that. Instead, I said, "Understood, sir," and hung up. I looked around my apartment again, the commendation still unopened in the drawer. Every wall held evidence of my work maps, coordinates, faces of men who came home because of information I provided. No one in my family had ever asked about them. They wanted proof in medals and combat scars, not data sets and quiet hours of analysis. It was a strange kind of loneliness to save lives and still have to defend the way you save them. When I walked into work the next day, Briggs was in the conference room. He had gathered the team for introductions. He told a story about my father's unit, ending it with a joke about how Keaton blood doesn't do well outside the office. The room laughed. I didn't. I was beginning to understand that the war I had to fight was not against an enemy on foreign soil, but against the ghosts of authority my father had left behind. In the middle of the meeting, my phone buzzed. An internal message flashed across the screen. It was from Briggs, forwarded from his personal inbox. The subject line read, "Training file, restricted." I clicked, and inside was a note he must have forgotten to delete. It said simply, "Keep an eye on her. Old habits die hard." The her was me. It was confirmation that I had inherited more than my father's name. I had inherited his enemies. That night, I wrote my first private report about the mission. I also wrote another file titled simply, "Patterns of Disregard." It was not official. It was a record for myself, a place to track every small cut before it became a wound. Family conflict and professional betrayal were merging into one. My mother's words echoed from the last call we had shared. "Confrontation brings trouble, Mara." Maybe. But silence was beginning to taste like surrender. I decided then that I would not let either of them, my father or Briggs, define what service meant. I had built my career on facts, not family loyalty, and facts, when kept long enough, have a way of turning into truth that demands to be seen. The conference room at the Naval Intelligence Center always felt colder than it should. The walls were glass. The air smelled of coffee and salt from the bay, and the silence before a briefing was its own kind of pressure. I stood at the front with my laptop connected to the main screen, ready to present the updated threat maps for Operation Silent Reef. My slides were clean data-verified risks marked in red. The officers filled the seats slowly. When Briggs walked in, the room straightened like someone had raised a flag. He smiled without warmth and said, "Let's keep this short." I began explaining the intel correlation between satellite signals and coastal radar gaps. Halfway through my third slide, he interrupted. "We don't need input from someone who's never left the air-conditioned room." The laughter started from the right side of the table and rolled across like a wave. It was the sound of permission men laughing because someone in power said they could. I kept my hands steady and poured myself a cup of water. They laughed. I memorized every laugh. I finished the presentation while they checked their phones. When I sat down, Briggs thanked me in a tone that turned the word into insult. Later that afternoon, I passed him in the corridor. He leaned against the wall talking to someone on speaker. When he saw me, he ended the call and said with a grin, "Nothing personal, Lieutenant, just team culture." I nodded. Team culture. That night, I went home to dinner with my brother Evan and his wife Laura. My mother had joined them, saying the house felt empty since my father spent most evenings at the Veterans Club. We ate quietly until Evan mentioned Briggs. He said the man had come to a family barbecue last weekend. My fork froze. Laura smiled faintly, eyes avoiding mine. She said he was charming in person. Maybe if you smiled more, Briggs would listen. The table went still. My mother changed the subject. I excused myself early. The street outside smelled of rain and diesel. I stood there a long time before driving back to base housing. 2 days later, the reassignment notice came through. Effective immediately, Lieutenant Mara Keaton was to provide logistical support for administrative operations. Translation removed from main intel work. I knew who signed the order. Briggs's initials were at the bottom. The next morning, he stopped by my cubicle pretending surprise. He said it was just rotation, experience broadening. I said nothing. I had learned that silence could make people nervous. That week, there was a farewell party for another officer. Briggs arranged it in the lounge near the docks. He called my name loud enough for everyone to hear. "Hey, Lieutenant Google, come join us." More laughter. Someone printed a fake badge with that nickname and stuck it to my cup. Lieutenant Google. I smiled, raised the cup like a toast, and said, "Better Google than clueless." The room laughed again, but not the same way. The tone shifted. For a second, Briggs looked uncertain. I kept smiling until he looked away. It was a small revenge, quick and sharp, but it felt good. On my way home, I stopped by the pier. The ships were dark outlines against the bay lights, blinking like slow heartbeats. I thought about how easy it was for them to turn someone's skill into a joke, how quickly a woman in uniform could become a punchline. I also thought about how information once stored never disappears. I had saved every message, every meeting transcript, every note of condescension. I didn't know yet what I would do with them, only that I would not delete them. Family betrayal ran deeper than office gossip. The same man who humiliated me now spent weekends with my brother's wife. The same father who taught me about discipline would call it improper to ask questions. My family and my workplace were becoming reflections of each other, both built on ranks and silence. At night, I replayed the laughter from the conference room until it became white noise. The next morning, I walked past Briggs's office. His blinds were half closed, his voice low on the phone. I caught the words, dinner, and Laura. I kept walking. In this world, you survive by gathering evidence before you decide what justice will look like. I began documenting everything in a secure folder labeled Observations. Every insult, every reassignment note, every casual smirk. I did it without anger, only precision. If power was going to test my patience, I intended to make patience my weapon. I remembered my father's voice. We fight wars. You file reports. Maybe reports were exactly what would win this one. The laughter still echoed in my head, but now it sounded less like humiliation and more like a list of witnesses. Administrative duty meant endless forms, phone calls about supply delays, and answering questions no one wanted to ask. The new office was smaller. No windows, and the hum of the air conditioner filled every pause. Briggs called it temporary, but I knew better. He passed by sometimes, standing in the doorway pretending to check on progress. Most days he just smiled and said something like, "Paperwork suits you, Lieutenant." It was meant to sting. I learned to respond with the same polite silence that had carried me through family dinners. The real pain arrived through the screen. One afternoon, while checking logistics reports, I saw his name tagged on social media. A photo popped up. Briggs at a marina, arm around Laura, my sister-in-law. They stood too close for the picture to be casual. The caption read, "Sunday Breeze Best Company." The comments were full of emojis from mutual friends. My stomach dropped. The betrayal had crossed from professional to personal. It was no longer only his game. He was using family lines as his field. That night, I went to my parents' house again. My mother was folding laundry. I asked her if she had heard from Evan. She said he was on base and busy. I showed her the photo on my phone. She sighed and said, "Just stay quiet, honey. Men don't like confrontations." I wanted to laugh. Neither does justice, but it shows up anyway. She looked away, pretending not to understand. I went back to my apartment, closed the blinds, and stared at the photo until it blurred. The next morning, Briggs walked into my office cheerful. He mentioned Laura by name, said she had good taste in music. I didn't answer. He mistook my silence for defeat. He didn't know silence was a shield. A week later, during a meeting about departmental expenses, I noticed a number that didn't fit. The training fund for advanced operations was overdrawn by several $1,000s. Receipts were vague. Entertainment and morale listed as justification. I asked the finance clerk quietly. She whispered that Briggs had hosted a private off-base celebration for his team. The Navy calls them morale events. Unofficially, they are parties. I smiled for the first time that week. If the Navy can't audit his soul, at least they can audit his budget. I started collecting data, small pieces that looked harmless alone. A receipt for imported whiskey, a catering invoice from a private venue, a vehicle request marked personal. I saved them in an encrypted folder labeled Supply Discrepancies. Every evening I added more careful not to draw attention. I was not angry, not yet. I was focused. When I had enough, I sent an anonymous packet through the internal audit portal with a short message attached. Review of recent training fund allocations suggested. Within 2 weeks, the base inspector visited our department. The news spread quietly but quickly. Briggs was called into the administrative office for questioning. For the first time since he arrived, his voice didn't fill the hallway. He came out pale, holding a stack of papers, walking faster than usual. No one said anything, but everyone knew. Later that day, he gathered the team and announced that from now on, all expenses would require triple verification. He tried to sound authoritative, but it came out defensive. I kept my face neutral. When he looked my way, I met his eyes and said, "Good idea, sir." The next morning, an official memo circulated. Commander Briggs had received a formal caution regarding procedural conduct. It was mild, not career-ending, but enough to leave a mark. Enough to make the same officers who once laughed hesitate before joining in. In the cafeteria, I overheard one of them whisper, "Maybe the lieutenant knows more than she lets on." I pretended not to hear. Inside, I felt a quiet satisfaction. It wasn't triumph. It was balance restoring itself 1 decimal point at a time. That evening, I walked by the docks again. The air smelled of salt and diesel, the sky layered in gray. I thought about Laura and Evan, about how betrayal always disguises itself as affection before it strikes. I thought about Briggs, about how arrogance is just fear wearing medals. He had power built on noise. I had patience built on proof. I didn't need to shout. My version of revenge was simple documentation. Truth recorded long enough becomes its own weapon. In my small office, I wrote another note in my private journal. The world tests women by silence, but silence remembers. The next day, my father called. He had heard from Evan that there were rumors at the base. He said, "You should keep a low profile. Don't embarrass the family." I said I won't. I didn't add that the family was already doing that without my help. When I hung up, I saw the email confirmation from the audit department. "Your report has been received and will be reviewed." I sat back and let the relief settle. It was a small step, almost invisible, but it shifted the ground beneath him. Briggs avoided me for a few days. When he finally stopped by, he looked tired. He asked if I was managing the logistics smoothly. I smiled and said, "Everything under control." His eyes narrowed like he could hear the unspoken line underneath. "Everything under control, and you are not." He left without another word. I opened my drawer, took out the photo of him and Laura, and deleted it. I didn't need reminders. I had evidence. Justice doesn't always need noise. Sometimes it starts with a paper trail and ends with silence that makes the guilty look over their shoulders. The morning Operation Silent Reef began. The air over the base carried a strange tension. I was not part of the deployment team. My clearance had been limited after Briggs said the mission required combat experience. I spent the day reviewing logistics requests, trying not to think about the data set I had built for that very operation. Late afternoon, a message came from the control room. "Satellite link loss, unexpected signal interference." I ran to the monitor bay, heart pounding. The screen showed scrambled coordinates, then static. Someone shouted that the SEAL team had gone dark. I felt my chest tighten. The interference pattern looked familiar, almost identical to one I had flagged in my earlier analysis. I had warned them that the signal noise suggested enemy jamming near the drop zone. Briggs had ignored it. Now the pattern was on screen in real time. Minutes passed like hours, the base filled with coded chatter. Then the report came through. Contact confirmed. 2 men down, 1 helicopter damaged. The line went silent again. Around me, people spoke in clipped sentences. I heard my name once whispered. Later that night, Briggs called an emergency meeting. His voice was calm at first, then sharper. He said there had been a data leak, that someone had compromised mission files. The room turned toward me before he said it. Lieutenant Keaton had access to those data sets, correct. I could feel my pulse in my neck. I said the files were secure and encrypted. He said apparently not. The accusation hung in the air, heavier than the silence after. By morning, an official notice arrived. Temporary suspension pending investigation. I had 30 minutes to clear my desk. My badge deactivated before noon. Walking out of the building, I felt the eyes following me through the glass walls. They did not see relief or guilt on my face, only calm. But inside, every word they had ever said about me echoed louder. Too soft, too young, too quiet. Now they would add untrustworthy. I drove to my parents' house because I did not know where else to go. My father was on the porch reading the paper. He looked up once, then folded it. I told him what happened, that Briggs blamed me for a leak that did not exist. He said nothing at first, then sighed. "Don't drag our family name down." The words hit harder than Briggs's accusation. Family loyalty meant silence again, even when I needed defense. My mother stood behind him, wringing her hands, saying maybe it will blow over. I realized then that protection in this family always depended on obedience. I left before dinner. At the base gate, the guard looked at my temporary pass and avoided eye contact. The ride to Coronado Beach was quiet. The ocean had always been where I sorted chaos. I parked, took off my shoes, walked to the water. The sand was cold even through my socks. In the distance, ships moved like slow shadows. I sat down and held my badge for a long time. The surface reflected the moonlight bright for a second before dulling again. They took my badge. Not my honor. I whispered it aloud as if saying it could make it true. I thought about the men injured because someone ignored data that could have saved them. I thought about the hours I had spent proving myself in a system built to erase credit from people like me. I thought about my father's pride, how it only appeared when others validated it. I pressed my badge into the sand and let the salt water cover it. The waves pulled it away without ceremony. I didn't watch it disappear. Instead, I stared at the horizon where the ocean met the night. Somewhere beyond that line were people still believing in the chain of command. Somewhere beyond it were men like Briggs telling stories to protect their image. I stayed there until the tide reached my knees. The cold helped me focus. Anger had shape now, not loud or dramatic, but controlled. Betrayal felt like a clean cut. The only thing left was the decision about what to do with it. I walked back to the car, drenched and shaking, but steady. The suspension letter waited on the passenger seat. I read it again. It said I would be contacted for questioning by the Internal Review Board. I folded it carefully and placed it in the glove compartment. Proof not memory. As I drove home, the radio played low. The announcer mentioned the incident in vague terms, a compromised mission, ongoing investigation. No names, no responsibility. I turned it off. At home, I stripped the uniform, folded it neatly, and placed it on the chair. It still smelled of the ocean. Without the rank patch, it looked like any other fabric. For years, I had believed the uniform defined the person. That night, I learned the person had to define the uniform. I went to the balcony and looked over the city lights. The base was visible across the bay, bright and distant. My phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. It said simply, "Keep quiet and it will pass." No signature, but I knew whose words they were. I deleted it. The water in the bay shimmered under the streetlights. Somewhere out there was the truth, waiting for someone patient enough to dig for it. I had lost my position, my clearance, my family's respect, but not my clarity. Betrayal has a way of teaching precision. They could strip me of access, but not of memory. And memory, when nurtured carefully, becomes the foundation of justice. 2 weeks passed before I answered the phone call from Captain Elias Reyes. He had served with my father 20 years ago and carried the same voice of command, but without the arrogance. He said he had heard about my suspension and that sometimes the truth hides in the logs the Navy forgets to delete. We met at a quiet cafe near the marina, where retired officers went to watch ships instead of conversations. He wore civilian clothes, cap low, eyes sharp. He said softly, "The Navy teaches silence." "But silence has layers, Lieutenant." I nodded. I understood exactly what he meant. He slid a small encrypted drive across the table. "Old credentials still work if you know where to look. You might find what you need to clear your name." He left without another word. I drove back to my apartment and sat at my desk until the room blurred. The drive contained archived system logs, timestamps from the days before the mission failure. I compared them to the records in the official report and saw it immediately. The sequence of access times did not match. Briggs's ID appeared after the final data lock, but before deployment. He had gone back into the file's shifted numbers by minutes enough to move blame from his permission oversight to my supposed leak. The manipulation was elegant, almost perfect. Almost. He forgot the backup sync, left a shadow record. I followed it, tracing his edits line by line. It was like watching betrayal unfold in code. My pulse steadied as I documented each alteration. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. I felt control returning. I could not access the main database from suspension status, but I still had clearance to secondary systems. I used that access to mirror his changes, restoring the original timestamps and saving screenshots. Then I wrote a report factual and calm with attachments labeled Evidence Packet A. I named the document Silent Reef Anomaly Review. It was not anger that guided me now. It was precision. I sent the file to myself, encrypted again, then created what I called the Public Revenge File, ready to go to the Office of Naval Intelligence if Briggs tried to bury the truth. Around midnight, I leaned back and let out a slow breath. The ocean outside was invisible, but I could hear it moving. Justice moves like that too slow until unstoppable. A few nights later, I went to a small bar near the base, a place where off-duty officers told stories they should not. I sat in the corner, listening. Briggs was there loud as always, a glass in hand, bragging to a group of younger officers. He said the investigation would clear him because he had proof the intel officer mishandled data. He laughed, saying, "I'll take credit anyway." The phrase hit me like a signal. One of the men was recording on his phone. When Briggs stumbled to the counter, I walked past their table as if leaving and whispered to the young officer, "You might want to back that up before he sobers." He grinned and nodded. The next day, a short video clip arrived anonymously in my inbox. Briggs clearly drunk saying those same words. I smiled. Mini revenge, small but satisfying. I attached the clip to an anonymous email labeled Audit Suggestion and sent it to the Internal Ethics Board. No message, no accusation, just the file and the note. Cross-reference with budget discrepancies. Then I opened my hidden folder again and double-checked everything. Every piece fit together now. Data manipulation, budget abuse, and his arrogance recorded in his own voice. I knew what I had could dismantle him, but timing mattered. If I sent it too soon, they would treat it as personal retaliation. If I waited too long, he might rewrite the system again. I decided to hold until the next command audit cycle when all logs were reviewed by ONI automatically. That way, exposure would look like routine discovery. I wrote the submission draft in advance, addressed to the review officer I had once trained under. The file was ready. All I needed was patience. That night, I dreamed of the ocean again, waves forming patterns like lines of code. Every movement predictable once you understood the current. I woke before dawn, checked my inbox. There was a message from Captain Reyes, just 3 words. The tide turns. I understood. ONI had begun their quarterly data integrity check. I smiled for the first time in months. Somewhere on a secure server, my packet waited to surface. Briggs would wake up soon and think the world was normal. By evening, it would not be. I brewed coffee and watched the first light touch the water. They thought they had taken everything from me. They had only given me time to think. Revenge was not shouting in a hallway. It was quiet correction, written in the language of truth. The summons reached me early on a Tuesday. It was short and formal, and it said to report to the main conference suite for review with the Office of Naval Intelligence. Suspended personnel were rarely called into those rooms unless the investigation had turned. I ironed my dress whites, the same uniform I had worn on the day they took my badge, and I walked across the base with the calm of someone who already knew the truth would speak. Outside the glass doors, 2 guards waited. Inside the room was already full. Admiral Haynes sat at the head of the long table, flanked by 2 ONI investigators and the base legal officer. On the side screens, I could see frozen frames of system dashboards, timestamps, and the header of Silent Reef mission log. Commander Tyler Briggs sat halfway down the table. His cap was on the table, his hands folded so tightly that his knuckles were almost white. For the first time since I had met him, he did not look entertained. The lead investigator, a woman with a calm face and a sharp voice, began by stating that the audit had found irregularities in the mission data trail. She said that log replicas from the backup server did not match the active file and that edits had been made by an account with commander-level access after the briefing but before the mission. She asked that the original unaltered logs be displayed on the main screen. The lights dimmed slightly, and the largest monitor filled with the lines I already knew by heart. Access record, date, time, user. There it was, Briggs. Accessing the mission package at a time when no further changes were authorized. Then another line, Keaton, earlier, with a note that said preliminary risk advisory attached. The investigator turned to me. Lieutenant Keaton, did you have these records? Yes, sir, I sent them 3 months ago. To whom? To the operations chain and to the commander of the Mission Alliance. No one responded. A slow silence spread across the table. It was not the silence of confusion. It was the silence of people watching a story change shape in front of them. Admiral Haynes looked from me to Briggs. Commander, any explanation? Briggs cleared his throat. He said the system must have merged old files. He said the lieutenant had been suspended for a possible leak. The investigator cut him off and asked the technician to play Supplemental Evidence File 3. On the side screen, a video opened. It showed a bar low-light off-duty uniforms. It showed Briggs talking to junior officers holding a drink saying, "I will take credit anyway." No one in the room laughed. The legal officer wrote something down. The investigator said, "Our concern today is not personal conduct. Our concern is that an officer with authority over a high-risk mission altered the record in order to direct blame toward a subordinate whose analysis had in fact warned of the threat." She turned back to me. "Lieutenant, was your analysis accurate at the time?" "Yes, Mom." The pattern I identified matched the interference the team encountered. Why was the advisory not implemented? Because I had been removed from the intel team. The Admiral exhaled slowly. He clasped his hands and said, "I received no such advisory." I answered with the same even tone I had used in every ignored email. "It is in your inbox, sir." Date stamped, along with the follow-ups. The legal officer asked to see the email header. The technician projected it. 3 messages sent from my account on 3 different dates, none of them opened. For 6 months, I had lived with a taste of accusation. In that moment, I watched it move across the table and settle where it belonged. The Admiral spoke again. "Commander Briggs, you altered an operational record during an active investigation. You attributed fault to an officer whose advisory you did not read. You exposed our special operations personnel to a preventable risk." Briggs started to speak, but the words failed. His mouth opened once, twice. No sound. The Admiral said, "Until this is fully resolved, you are relieved of command responsibilities. You will surrender your access cards at once." The guards at the door straightened. Briggs stared at me. I met his eyes without satisfaction on my face. The satisfaction was inside quiet like the sea at night. The investigator then addressed me. "Lieutenant Keaton, given the contents of this inquiry, your suspension is lifted effective immediately. Your record will reflect cooperation and early reporting. Thank you, Mom." She added one more line. "It appears the initial concerns of data compromise were unfounded and were part of a narrative introduced after the fact. That was the clean way of saying that someone had lied about me." When the meeting ended, people filed out without looking at Briggs. He stayed in his chair. His shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen. As I stepped out into the corridor, younger officers who had once called me Lieutenant Google avoided my eyes. Not out of disrespect, out of shame. Within hours, the internal news bulletin picked up the case. It did not print every detail, but the headline said what needed to be said. "Intel officer exposes mishandling in Special Operations mission. Corrective actions underway. On military bases, news travels faster than radio." By evening, even the families at the housing area were talking about the hearing. My brother texted a single question. Was it really him? I answered yes. He did not reply. Later that night, my father called. His voice was stiff the way it was when he had to admit a mistake. He said, "I saw the notice. I did not know they ignored you." I said, "You did not ask." There was a pause long enough for both of us to remember the day he told me not to drag the family name down. Now the family name was clean because I refused to stay quiet. After the call, I stepped out to the balcony and looked toward the base lights across the water. The day had been heavy, but I felt light. Not loud, just steady. Justice prevailed. My father saw it on television before I could tell him myself. The base channel ran a segment on the inquiry, short but clear, naming the mission, stating that an intelligence officer had identified the threat early and that command oversight had failed to act. They did not say Briggs's name, but anyone who lived on a military installation could connect the dots. My mother called first. Her voice was thick. "Your father is watching the news again. He will not say a word, but he has not moved from the chair." I heard the television in the background, the familiar reporter voice talking about accountability and integrity. Then my mother said softly, "Your father, he is proud. He just does not know how to say it." I stood in my kitchen with the phone to my ear, looking out the window toward the bay. For a second, I let myself imagine him standing up, calling me by rank, telling me I was right. The moment passed. Some people defend their pride longer than they defend the truth. I told my mother I was fine. She cried anyway. The next day, I reported to the admin building to sign my reinstatement papers. The tone was completely different now. The same clerk who had handed me the suspension envelope weeks earlier stood up when I entered and said, "Welcome back, Lieutenant." I signed the forms accepting full restoration of duties and clearance. There was a separate envelope, thicker, and inside was a formal letter of appreciation from the Office of Naval Intelligence. It stated that my early submission of risk assessments had protected American personnel and that my detailed documentation contributed to conflict justice inside the command. Those last two words stayed with me. Conflict justice. That was exactly what it had been. Not anger for the sake of anger. Justice inside a system that had tried to turn its face away. When I stepped outside, the sun over Coronado was bright. Sailors passed by with quicker nods than usual. A few saluted, though my rank did not require it in that context. Respect sometimes shows up in small breaches of routine. At midday, I walked through the main corridor toward the operations wing. I heard footsteps coming the other way. Briggs. He was out of uniform, wearing service khakis without the air of ease he used to carry. For an instant, I thought he might try to confront me. Instead, he lowered his gaze, stepped to the side, and let me pass. No joke, no smirk, not even a stiff nod, just quiet avoidance. It was not triumph I felt. It was confirmation. The man who once laughed at me in front of a room now could not hold my eyes. That is revenge. Emotional, not loud, but deeply satisfying. Later that afternoon, I received a message to report to the training compound. I assumed it was more paperwork. When I arrived, SEAL Commander Avery Cole was waiting outside. He had the look of a man who did not like administrative duties but respected what they meant. He offered his hand. "Lieutenant Keaton." I took it. His grip was firm, warm, despite the breeze from the water. He said, "I read the full report. You saved lives. That is command material." The way he said it mattered, not as a favor, not because of my father, not because the Navy needed to fix optics. He said it like a field officer talking to another professional. In that moment, all the late nights of analysis, all the meetings where I was talked over, all the toxic family comments about filing reports instead of fighting all of it, aligned into one straight line. I thanked him. He added quietly, "Some of us knew there was more to the story. You proved it. That is how you change culture. One document at a time." I smiled. Quiet justice. After he left, I sat on the low wall near the compound and let the sun warm my uniform. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Evan. It said, "Heard you were right." I stared at it for a long time. There was no apology for the night he said, "Maybe if you smiled more, Briggs would listen." There was no admission that bringing Briggs into family spaces had been a mistake, but there was acknowledgement. Sometimes that is all you get from brothers raised to believe that only one kind of service is real. I replied, "Thanks. We will talk later." I did not tell him everything. I did not tell him his friend had nearly gotten men killed. I did not tell him that loyalty to the wrong person can turn into betrayal of your own blood. Some lessons have to grow in silence. That evening, I went to my parents' house. My father was on the porch again. This time he stood when I walked up. He did not hug me. He did not say I was proud of you. He said I saw the report. "Good work, Lieutenant." He used my rank. For him, that was everything. I nodded. "Thank you, sir." My mother wiped her eyes behind him. The room felt lighter than it had in months. The weight of suspicion was gone. What remained was respect reclaimed. On the drive home, I thought about how close I had come to being forgotten as just another woman in uniform accused of an error she did not make. How many others had been silenced because they did not keep proof? How many daughters had to fight both the command structure and the family table at the same time? This time, the truth won. Not because it shouted, because it was patient. The day of the ceremony arrived with the kind of clear California light that makes every edge look honest. Coronado Naval Base was ready. Flags lined the path. White chairs faced the stage. The brass rail gleamed. The air from the bay brought the smell of salt and jet fuel. A band waited to the side instruments, raised shoes already in formation. People came in slow waves. First the families in summer clothes, then sailors in dress whites, then officers with faces that carried long years of command. I waited behind the stage with two other recipients, both older, both men, both clearly surprised to see me there, but too disciplined to show it. An aide checked our names. When he reached mine, he smiled. Lieutenant Mara Keaton, Silver Star for actions in support of special operations. He said it with respect, not surprise. That alone felt like repair. I adjusted my uniform, felt the metal pins from previous commendations, and looked out from behind the curtain. In the third row to the right, I saw him, Commander Tyler Briggs, no longer the loudest man in the room. He sat stiff eyes on the stage jaw set. He had to attend. The report said so. He was about to watch the woman he tried to frame receive public recognition from the service he tried to deceive. That was justice. That was revenge, emotional without a single raised voice. The announcer stepped to the microphone. The music began formal and rising. As names were read, each recipient walked up, saluted, received a medal, took a photo, moved aside. My name was last, Lieutenant Mara Keaton. For exceptional tactical intelligence, for early identification of high-risk patterns, for actions that preserved American lives. I stepped out into the sun. The wind off the water lifted the edge of my white jacket. I kept my eyes forward and walked up the steps. As I reached the center of the stage, I glanced across the crowd. My father was there standing now, my mother beside him, eyes wet. My brother Evan next to Laura, both of them unable to look away. This was the twist of real life. The same family that had said we fight wars, you file reports, was watching me receive a medal for a report. The Admiral pinned the Silver Star on my chest. The medal was cool at first, then warm exactly like the day I imagined it. He shook my hand and turned to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, this officer sent 3 reports that would have prevented what happened off the coast. She sent them months before the operation. She was not heard. She continued to serve. Today we hear her." The applause began. It was not polite clapping. It was the kind that rolls from the back to the front that grows as more people understand what they are honoring. I heard the sound pass over Briggs like a wave and keep going. Then from the side of the stage, I saw movement. SEAL Commander Avery Cole walked forward, dress uniform, perfect face serious. He stopped in front of me, heels together, eyes steady. For a heartbeat, the base went silent. The band lowered their instruments. He raised his hand in a crisp salute and said in a voice that carried over the water At ease, Mom. A SEAL commander had just saluted the intel officer who warned them. The crowd exploded in applause. People stood. Some of the younger sailors whistled before remembering where they were. It did not matter. The moment was bigger than protocol. It was the image of justice. It was the reversal everyone in that audience understood. I saw heads turn toward Briggs. He did not move. His face was pale. His eyes were on the ground. He had to witness the respect he tried to block. I held the salute for a second, let the cameras take it, then released. I looked again toward the back. My father was still standing. Slowly, as if remembering muscle memory from long ago, he lifted his hand in a formal military salute to his daughter. For a moment, the years between us fell away. The dinners where he dismissed my work. The day he told me not to bring the family name down. The hours I spent proving the numbers while he praised my brothers for missions I had indirectly protected. All of it eased. This was closure emotional, not loud, not dramatic, but deep. I nodded back at him. Thank you, sir. Later, the Internal Navy Bulletin would carry the headline, Intel officer whose warnings were ignored receives Silver Star. The photo they would choose was not of the admiral pinning the medal. It was of the SEAL commander, saluting me while the audience stood. They would not know that in the same frame, slightly to the right, a retired colonel was also saluting pride, finally winning over stubbornness. Justice and betrayal family karma in one captured second. He waited for me outside the admin building where the afternoon sun hit the concrete hard enough to make the air waver. The base was quieter than usual, most people inside paperwork hours. I stepped out with a folder under my arm, thinking about training schedules at Quantico about next month, about finally doing work where people actually wanted to learn. Then I saw him. Commander Tyler Briggs, no cap sleeves, rolled file in hand. He looked smaller without the background of a briefing room. He looked like a man who had been told no more than once in a single week. Lieutenant Keaton, he called out, using the name properly for the first time. I stopped. I did not invite him into the shade. He walked toward me, the sun behind him, casting a long shadow across the wall. For a moment I saw him the way I first did, the man who joked loudly and made whole rooms laugh at me. That version was gone. This was the version who had sat in a hearing while his edits were read aloud. This was the version after justice. He cleared his throat. I wanted to talk. I said nothing. Silence can defend you even outdoors. He shifted the folder from one hand to the other. I am putting together an appeal. They say I can submit a character statement. They say if someone from the intel side supports it, it will help. They will listen to you, Keaton. You are the hero now. The words did not sting. They rang hollow. He was not calling me hero because he believed it. He was calling me hero because he needed something. That was the audacity of men used to doors opening. Even after exposure, they come back expecting access. I let the quiet sit between us. He went on. Look, I made a mistake. Paperwork mistake. You know how fast things move. Ops tempo. I did not want the mission to look bad. I did not want your father to be pulled in. I wanted to protect the team. We are on the same side here. He said it like we shared a history of mutual respect and not of public humiliation and data manipulation. I looked straight at him. You wanted to protect yourself. His jaw tightened, but he did not deny it. Nobody remembers the details he said. They just remember the headline. I need something that shows this was not malicious. You can say I was under pressure. You can say I did not mean to jeopardize anyone. You can say I acted in haste. His eyes searched my face for softness, for the old habit women are trained in, to the one where we smooth over other people's wrong choices so everyone can stay comfortable. He was hoping the same woman he called Lieutenant Google would be the woman who saved his record. I thought about the SEALs who had gone dark out there. I thought about the young officers who watched him laugh at me in meetings and then watched me clear his mess. I thought about my father telling me not to drag the family name down, only to stand and salute when the truth finally came out. thought about family karma, about how betrayal always circles back, even when it wears a uniform. I said the line calmly. Heroes do not rewrite history, Commander. They live with it. His mouth opened slightly, as if he had not expected a direct refusal. You are really not going to help me. I shook my head. No, sir. You wrote your part. Now you live with your draft. For a second, anger flashed across his face, the same anger from months ago when I dared to present data he did not like. But anger without power fades fast. He looked past me toward the parking lot as if searching for another option. There was none. ONI had their files. The video was in their system. The budget warnings were in their system. My reports were in their system. I had done my work early and quietly. He had tried to bury it. The Navy likes records. It listens eventually. He tried again. Your father and I served at the same time. He and I did not always agree, but he knows what it is like to make hard calls. He would understand. You have influence there. You could talk to him. This was the last card. Appeal to family. Appeal to the same loyalty he had mocked. I said, you used my family to get close to this base. You used my brother's wife. You tried to use my silence. That chapter is over. He swallowed. His eyes dropped. He looked older in that moment, like the sun had taken 10 years from him. Please, Lieutenant. My voice stayed steady. Respect is not a favor you trade when you need it. Respect is earned when no one is watching. Right now, everyone is watching. I stepped around him and walked toward the lot. I did not look back. The sun was behind me now, and I could see his shadow on the wall, long and thin, cut by the railing. It was a clean, visual closure. The man who once filled the room with noise now reduced to a silhouette on warm concrete. He stayed there for a while, then slowly turned away. I kept walking, breathing easier with every step. Revenge did not have to be loud. Sometimes revenge was saying no in daylight, where everyone could see that the person who was mocked did not become the person who begged. The halls of Quantico smelled of new paint and coffee, a mix that always meant the start of a training cycle. It had been 6 months since the ceremony. My transfer papers came through quietly, almost politely, as if the Navy itself wanted to close the loop without fanfare. The letter called it a temporary teaching assignment, but I knew it was something more. It was a way to make use of the kind of experience that cannot be taught in manuals. My first morning in the classroom, the rows of cadets looked sharper than I expected. Most were young, barely mid-20s, full of questions they had not yet learned to hide. I saw myself in a few of them. The way they sat up straighter when I mentioned operations, the flicker of doubt when they realized the person teaching them was not a man. I began the session with a sentence I had written on the board the night before. They will laugh at you, underestimate you, silence you. Let them. Justice has patience. No one spoke at first. Then a hand went up from the second row. Mom, did that really happen to you? I smiled. Something like that. But I am not here to talk about the past. I am here to show you how to survive it. They leaned forward, pens ready. I taught them about patterns not just in data, but in people. How arrogance leaves digital fingerprints. How the smallest timestamp can change the outcome of an entire operation. How truth, when documented correctly, outlives every rumor. By the end of the week, they stopped seeing me as the exception. They started seeing me as an example. That was healing. Not the loud kind, but the kind that rebuilds the floor under you, one conversation at a time. On Fridays, I stayed after class answering questions. Some of the women lingered longer. One cadet named Harper said quietly, "Mom, my family thinks I joined because I could not handle real life." I told her, "You joined because you wanted to prove that protecting people is real life. Remember that when they doubt you." She nodded, eyes bright. Those moments reminded me that revenge does not always end in applause. Sometimes it ends in mentorship. The base at Quantico backed onto a stretch of river that caught the sunset just right. In the evenings, I walked the path there alone, watching the water move. It was not the same as the ocean in Coronado, but it had the same rhythm. I like to think it was the Navy's way of giving me quieter tides. Every so often I received updates about Briggs. The appeal was denied. He accepted early retirement and moved inland away from bases and headlines. There was no satisfaction in it, only balance. That was betrayal family karma, playing itself out. What you send into the world comes back measured. My father called more often now. Short calls, awkward pauses, but genuine. He asked about Quantico, about the cadets, about whether I missed field work. I said sometimes. He said the same thing he used to say before deployments. Stay sharp. It meant I am proud. My mother visited once, bringing homemade cookies wrapped in a towel. She stood in the back of my classroom watching me speak. When the lecture ended, she clapped softly and said, "I did not know you could sound like a commander." I smiled. Maybe that was the last lesson left for her too. On the wall behind my desk hung a photo from the ceremony, the one the Navy used for the article. SEAL Commander Cole mid-salute me, standing still, the flag behind us. In the far corner of the frame, you could see my father, hand raised in return. Every time I looked at it, I remembered that day not as revenge, but as restoration. Respect had found its rightful direction. Justice had spoken in the quiet language of proof. Late one evening after class, I stood outside near the river. The sky was the kind of blue that turns to silver before dark. The wind was gentle, carrying the smell of pine and salt. I closed my eyes. The voice of the past came back faint, distant. He laughed at my rank. But respect is not a medal. It is who salutes first. I opened my eyes and smiled. The water kept moving. Somewhere out there, new officers were learning the lessons I had to learn the hard way. Somewhere, someone was being dismissed in a room full of people and was choosing to stay calm, to document, to wait. That was how change started. Not with shouting, but with patience. Quiet justice. Revenge through truth. Dignity over money. Truth and closure. The things my audience of women 50 and older would understand best. You do not have to destroy someone to reclaim yourself. You just have to stand when they expect you to bow. That night, I walked back to my quarters, the sound of my boots steady on the pavement. The stars were faint, but visible. I thought about the future, about maybe writing a manual one day, not about warfare or intelligence, but about resilience, about what it takes to hold dignity when the world tries to take it. The Navy had taught me silence. Life had taught me what kind to keep.